Today we'll be making a fall harvest hash. I'm going to be using some particular vegetables for this, but the biggest thing I want you to know is that you could use pretty much anything that you have on hand. So I'm going to give you a basic formula for putting this hash together, but then you can use what you have in your fridge and in your pantry or what you've been given by a neighbor. So we are going to start out with some sort of fall vegetable, hence the fall harvest hash. So I have a sweet potato here. I have already roasted this off. This took about 35 minutes in a 400-degree oven. But by par cooking it, that means I can just pull the skin off of this glorious sweet potato. You could also use just any kind of white potato that you like as a starchy veg, and it makes a great base for everything else we're going to add. And this just has a lot more fall flavor. Now I'm going to hold this in my claw, so that will keep my fingers out of the way when I use my knife. And I'm gonna hold it in the middle and pinch on both sides. And I'm just gonna start making slices about half an inch wide, half an inch to an inch really. You want your final slices, or your final cubes, I should say, to be about bite size, something that will fit on a fork. Keep that in mind as you're chopping. I'm going to take a couple of these slices I've just made and cut them into little strips of about the same width. And then when I cut across those strips, I get little cubes, and that's where we want to go. I'm going to throw those in a bowl for right now. I'm going to wipe my board down for the next vegetable, and that will be an onion. You can use whatever kind of onion you have on hand. This could be, I have a white one. You could use the sweet yellows or a red or even small green onions. Or if you have a shallot, you could use that as well. I'm going to dice this onion, and it's a few steps on that. I'm going to pull it toward me, put my claw on top, and make a couple of cuts going from the stem end to the root end of this half of the onion. And I'm going to try to keep those cuts about the same width apart, and notice that I'm only going to the end. I'm not cutting through, I'm leaving that end together. Now I'm going to turn that onion toward me. And my cuts are going to be the same size again. Once again, using the claw so I keep my fingers out of the way of the knife. These are also about half an inch apart, so this is a really large dice. And then when I turn that onion back, all I have to do is cut across everything, and I get a great medium dice. This is a great recipe for using things up toward the end of the growing season. I've also got a lovely bell pepper here. Any color of bell pepper would be nice. And so I just find a stable side and I start cutting the big sides off, and I can discard the seed pod and all of the ribs and this stem all at one time. Now I'm gonna cut all of these into wide strips, again, about that half-inch mark. Do you see how I'm trying to keep everything at about the same size? And then I cut across those strips and get about half-inch squares. I also have an apple. Yes, we're going to put an apple into a savory dish. It's a very fall dish. I'm gonna leave the peel on that. I'm putting it on its shoulders. I've already removed the stem. And I'm going to cut a side off so I can lay it down flat and cut the other sides off the core. If you prefer to remove the core first, that's fine. And then I'm just gonna make big slices like you would if you were gonna have an apple for a snack. And cut across those slices again into bite-sized pieces. This is also a Honeycrisp apple, but any of the varieties that you find, I mean, apple is the fruit of fall, would mix well with this recipe because we're using all sorts of different kinds of vegetables. Here I have some lovely local kale. You could use any kind of green you wanted. You could use spinach, chard, any cooking greens. So I'm gonna strip each of these. Some of these stems are a little bit big. If you get baby greens and they don't have much of a stem, you don't have to worry about this piece. But where these are sticking out just a little bit, I'm gonna strip the leaves off of the stem so that we don't have stems sticking out. Okay, I'm gonna put this in a bowl to the side to give us even more color, more vegetables, more kinds of nutrition. I have a little bit of red cabbage here. I've already cut it in half, but cabbage seems to grow as you cut it, so I'm actually gonna cut that into a quarter. I want to take the core out. The core is really tough and doesn't have much flavor, so we're gonna get rid of that. Now that I have this nice, neat quarter of a cabbage, all I have to do is use my claw again and just slide my knife down over this quarter and just slightly, it's like a really big shred. It's like a slice or a really big shred. If you wanted to do this and have a food processor and you have a slicer blade, that would make very quick work out of this. When it gets a little wobbly or it's not feeling super stable, to be safe, you might want to turn it on a different side. And our final vegetable is a carrot. And like the other root vegetables, if you have a carrot, that would be nice, or a parsnip. Really, any root vegetable that you like would work well here if you're into turnips or something like that. I'm gonna take the tip off this carrot and the top. And then because this one's really big, I'm gonna cut it in half, and that also gives me a nice stable side, and then I'm gonna cut it into quarters. I'm just going to slice this into bite-sized pieces. Now, as the carrot grows bigger, I'm gonna get a little thinner with my slices so that each piece still stays about the same volume and cooks quickly. And lastly, I'm going to pop a couple of garlic cloves out of their skin. The easiest way to do that is to place it on a stable side, put your knife down on top, and then just hit the knife with the palm of your hand or a fist, and that pops the garlic out. Well, I've got to hit this one more time to pop the garlic out. If you are instead using the jarred garlic that's already minced up, then you may want to use about a teaspoon to a tablespoon of that, depending on how much garlic you like. Okay, so once you've sliced the garlic, you can put your knife, the tip of your knife, down on the board, put your hand flat on the back of it, and then just lift and lower it, rocking it up and down so that you get a mince. And in a mince, we're looking for 1/8 of an inch or smaller, but more important than anything is that everything is the same size, so it cooks at the same rate. And we're just about there with this garlic. I'm gonna grab another bowl to put it in. You can use any kind of prep bowls to get all your veggies together. And if you don't like some of this, just leave it out, or if you have something to substitute, put that back in. Now that's all of our veggies ready for our fall harvest hash, but we need to make our vinaigrette next. So I just have a medium-sized bowl and a whisk. If you don't happen to have a whisk, you can also use a fork. So you can make your own vinaigrette. A vinaigrette can just be an acid and some kind of oil, so lemon juice and olive oil or something like that. About a 1:2 to 1:3 ratio. So if you have 1 part of acid, you want 2 to 3 parts of oil. And that is a basic vinaigrette. We're gonna make a very fall-inspired vinaigrette today. So I have a little bit of acid in apple cider vinegar, but I also have a little bit of apple cider as well for some sweetness. So this is gonna be a sweet tart vinaigrette for all of these veggies that we're putting together. I'm gonna dump in my apple cider vinegar, and my apple cider. That's about 3 tablespoons of the vinegar and almost half a cup, right at half a cup of the cider. Now, a great way to bring the acid and the fat together is some kind of protein, and for that we're going to use Dijon mustard. We have 1 tablespoon of that. You could use any kind of mustard that you want. If you'd like a whole grain, or if you have just regular mustard sitting around, that would be fine as well. And some kind of sweetener. Today I've got honey, but you could use anything you have around. If you have a little maple syrup, if you have some agave syrup, or even some sorghum or molasses, that would work well in this. And there's about a tablespoon of that as well. Now at this point, when we get this together, I'm gonna whisk so that these things combine. Now I've got a couple of optional add-ins for this, and that is I have some dried thyme. You could use dried or fresh. Since this is dried, I'm using close to a teaspoon of this. If you were using fresh, you could use 2 to 3 times as much. And then I've got a little turmeric, and I know this might seem a little strange to add to a fall dish, but turmeric gives it a beautiful golden color, just like the leaves are turning. And also it's really great for you in regard to anti-inflammatory properties. So we're gonna mix all of that together. Now that we have our base ready, we're gonna drizzle in some olive oil. I have 3/4 of a cup of olive oil for all of this liquid, and with that mustard in there, it should blend together pretty well and make a salad dressing viscosity. So drizzle slowly, because what you're trying to do with your whisk or your fork is break up all these little fat globules. And you have to have time. All of these little tines on the whisk are breaking all that up. If you see oil pooling, you may want to stop pouring for a second and whisk that in. If you're good at this, when you get good at making your own dressings, then you don't even have to measure really. You can kind of just go by eye. This is starting to get thicker. I'm gonna add a pinch of salt. Generous pinch of salt. That was close to 1/4 of a teaspoon, and a tiny pinch of black pepper. That was more like 1/8 of a teaspoon. Now before I dump all this on anything, I will give it a taste. And the last thing that we want to do before we start cooking is get our optional garnishes together. Now you don't have to do these, but it's just a little fun way to add some texture, add a little bit of protein, and add a little flavor. So right here I have some hazelnuts. You could use, if you tolerate nuts, you could use any kind you want. You could also use seeds, such as sesame seeds or pumpkin seeds. Anything like that would be great for a little extra crunch. I have roasted these already on 400 for about 6 minutes. You always want to set a timer for nuts because they will burn very quickly. And I have my trusty meat tenderizer right here, and I'm just going to tap the nuts. I could also chop with my knife and just break them up into rough pieces. You could do this with a rolling pin or any heavy object you have in the kitchen that's safe for food surfaces. You could also pulse these in a food processor just a couple of times, and that will do it too. So now we've got those in a bowl, and one last garnish. I've got some lovely chives right here. Now, when you are cutting up herbs, the one thing you want to do is you want to slice them, not bruise them. So you want to use a sharp knife. I'm going to cut these off and get them even. So I'm taking the tops off, tossing those away. With chives, I like to cut them really small, unless I'm using them for a garnish on some kind of little hors d'oeuvre. So I cut these really, really tiny, about 1/8 of an inch or so. So that means you have to be very careful. You have to use the claw, and I'm gonna put my knife down, the tip of my knife, and that's gonna guide me so that I keep each of these slices regular and the same size. And I just sort of slide my knife back and forth. The tip never leaves the cutting board, but my blade goes down, and that way I'm slicing and not just smashing the chives. And you only really need a couple tablespoons worth of fresh herbs to finish off a lovely dish like this. And that will work right there. Just gonna leave those chives on my board, and we'll move over to the saute pan next so that we can cook up our hash. So to start cooking, you want to have everything close to you so that you don't have to run away from a hot pan and possibly burn something. So I'm also going to show you the order in which I'm going to cook these things, and we'll put them in that order. I'm going to start with the onions, the red pepper, the carrot slices, the apple, and the cabbage. Those things are going to take a little bit longer to cook, or they're harder veg, and so we're going to put those in first. Then the garlic will go next because it's tiny and it'll cook really fast. Our sweet potatoes are already cooked, so we just need to warm those through. And we're just wanting to wilt our kale or whatever green that you add to it. So I'm going to turn my burner on, and I'm turning it on about medium high. Now, if you have an electric range with the numbers on it, that's going to be about 6.5 to 7, depending on the size of your burner. Bigger burners are a little bit hotter. Okay, I've got my pan on, and I can feel that there's heat radiating off of it. So that's when I know that the pan's nice and hot. Then I like to put the oil in so that it doesn't sit there and get hot along with the pan. And we want just enough oil. This could be olive oil or cooking oil, whatever you have on hand. We want just enough to coat the bottom of the pan. Now, if you've got a good hot pan, then you should immediately start to see your oil shimmer a little bit. You don't want to see smoke coming off of it. That means your pan is too hot. So you just want to see the little shimmer. It looks like a mirage on a hot day on the highway. When you go into hot oil into a hot pan, you actually want to get close to it. That may not be your natural inclination, but if you drop things from up here or from what you think is a safe distance, you might splatter hot oil up on yourself. So we're gonna get into the pan and just lay each one of these in. So I'm starting with the onions and the red peppers. And you can use a wooden spoon or a metal spoon if that's safe for your pan. I have a high heat silicone spatula, and that way I don't have to worry about what kind of pan I'm using. And you want to move things around. This is fairly high heat. So if you let things sit too long, they're going to burn. Now, when do I add anything else? Well, when your onions start to turn translucent and they're not quite as opaque as they were before, when they get a little clear around the edges, that's when you can add your next ingredients. So I'm going to add the carrots and the apples now. And you need a really big saute pan for this dish if you use all of these ingredients. You want to give it room to move around and for surfaces to hit the heat. You also may need to modulate your heat a little bit, turn it down just a touch with these apples in here. They're going to give off their juice. Apples contain a lot of sugar, so if things start to stick on you, turn your heat down and make sure to stir frequently. We're starting to see all this color come together. Now, what's the next step and how do we know? Well, when your apples start to get a little bit of browning on them, browning from the cooking, not from hitting the air, then we can add our cabbage to the mix. So I'm getting a little bit of golden on these apples. It looks like they're losing their sharpness, so they're getting a little tender. Now I'm gonna add the cabbage. And at this high heat, you should really start to see some changes in your carrots, in your peppers, and then this cabbage is going to wilt down. It's getting all glossy from the oil. And a tip on preference on this is I like things to still have a little bit of crunchiness or toothsomeness. I don't like to cook things till they're all mushy. And that way, when we add something softer like our sweet potato or something that's not gonna have a lot of texture once it's cooked like our kale, I like to have a little crunch left. So I don't cook my veggies down till they're completely soft. However, if that's what you like, then you might want to turn your burner down a bit and then leave these on just a wee bit longer. At this point too, I'm gonna start seasoning my dish. So I'm going to take a pinch, about 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, and put that on there so that the salt can start seasoning and bringing out all the flavors of these fruits and veg. And when everything seems to get a little tender and happy together, then we'll add our garlic. And now we're only gonna saute the garlic for about a minute because we don't want it to burn. But we don't want that raw garlic taste either. And then you get that fragrance in the air. You're probably gonna make your neighbors jealous at this point. And now, about a minute later, we'll add the cooked sweet potato. And again, we're just warming that through. Now, that's sort of the main ingredient that makes a hash. Basically, you're taking leftovers, usually baked potatoes, boiled potatoes. Think of a corned beef hash, like you have after St. Patrick's Day, a little onion, and then whatever else you want to mix in. So a hash is just a mixture of all different things. It's great for using up stuff that's in your fridge, and you can just chop it all up and throw it together and saute it in the pan. It should only take a few minutes for the sweet potatoes to get heated through. And then we'll add our kale last. And now it seems like it's gonna come out of the pan, but the kale is going to wilt way down, so you don't have to worry about that. But you may wanna be a little bit gentler with how you stir everything around. You're mostly gonna fold the hot stuff over and tuck, there goes one leaf, tuck the kale in amongst the rest of the veggies. Now, if you start getting a little bit brown on the bottom, lower your heat. And you can, you don't have to worry if you get a little bit of brown stuff on the bottom of your pan. That's actually gonna be really good once we add some of our final ingredients here, our lovely vinaigrette. So these are some beautiful fall colors we've got here. This is a great side dish, but it can also be a main if you want to add some kind of protein to it. If you have a can of beans, or if you have some leftover chicken or pork, or you could even fry an egg and put it on top. That's a very typical way to finish up a hash, is a fried egg on top. And that would make a complete meal. All right, you see how my leaves have wilted? I'm gonna season one more time because I've added a lot more stuff. This is a little bit bigger pinch. This is more like half a teaspoon to a teaspoon. And now I'm gonna do a pinch of pepper. Be careful with that. You can inhale the pepper very easily. That'll make you sneeze. And see, I've got some browning on the bottom, and that's okay because I'm gonna turn my heat off. And I'm not gonna add all of my vinaigrette at once. I'm just gonna drizzle a little bit around the outside. And the acid, be careful about that because when you heat vinegar, also, you're gonna inhale it. But the acid in the vinaigrette is gonna help me scrape up all these little brown bits, and that's gonna be a lovely way to add flavor and depth to what is essentially a vegetarian dish. It's gonna give it a roundness and that sort of hefty flavor that we like. And this is a little bit loose right now, but all of these starchy vegetables will absorb that vinaigrette. So that's why I like to make plenty, especially if you're making this ahead and it sits for a while, because it might get a little dry because all of those starchy veg are gonna seize onto that liquid and absorb it. Now to plate. All right, and when you get ready to serve this, this is such a gorgeous dish that you really don't have to do a whole lot to it. I'm just going to put some of this on a nice plate. Of course, if you're using it as a side, you wouldn't have to worry about this. I'm just gonna put a pile kind of in a diagonal on the plate and let it fall and do what it may. And you have all that color and the brightness of the turmeric. And to finish it, I have those smashed hazelnuts we can sort of sprinkle on and around. If you have a favorite infused oil, if you don't do the vinaigrette and have a favorite infused oil, you could do a little drizzle of that around it. And I've got the fresh herb here. I've got chives today, but any sort of chives are good, or the more woody herbs like sage and thyme are good to sprinkle on this dish.